60 minutes for this webinar, and also to draw your attention to the fact that there's a lot of information about either this standard or Energy Leap on our website. So everything you hear today, you can find out even more about by going to our website. So I think that's probably all I need to say. And I'm now going to transition over to Catherine, and Catherine will tell us a little bit about Energy Leap. Thank you, Catherine.
Cool. Thank you, Peter, and thank you everybody for joining today. Welcome to our webinar. As the chair of Energy Leap, I'm absolutely thrilled to have so many people on the call to hear more about the work that Eric and his team, and it really is a true example of collaboration across many companies to have got to this point where we really have developed some standards around the barge demurrage space. And I'll obviously leave that to Eric and the team to talk through. What I wanted to do was just to give a couple of minutes for those of you who might not know, just to understand the who and the what about Energy Leap. So Energy Leap was founded 15 years ago, and it was set up by the industry, predominantly people focused in the oil space, to bring together like-minded people to work in a safe environment, as Peter's explained about the antitrust compliance policy, to discuss the common problems that we face and what solutions there could be out there. And I think over this slide and the next slide, you'll see that the way we're operating has evolved in some ways from a particular contractual focus, but really much more now to focus on the digital aspects of the industry that we're living in now. So we've seen so much development in the last 5 years or so, 10 years in digital capacity, what our companies want to be doing. And really, as Energy Leap, we realize that, in fact, there's a lot of opportunity in what we call in the pre-digital space to really develop standards and look at reference data and templates, and really try and move us as an industry forwards from having been very paper focused. And I'm sure that's something that resonates with everybody on the call, that really, particularly in the oil sector, we're still very dependent on a lot of pieces of paper moving around. They're not standardized, and it creates a lot of work. So I don't know if we can just quickly move on to the next slide. Yeah, so what we've got in Energy Leap is really quite a unique environment where we're bringing people together, and we're focusing particularly on the operational and contractual space, and really bringing people together to talk about the issues that we face. Because I think, if I think of my own experience within BP, we're very good at solving a lot of our own internal problems, but we're equally reaching a limit of what we can do ourselves. We need to be working collaboratively with other companies to find solutions to some of the problems that we face. We appreciate that we can't do it on our own. So Energy Leap is bringing together lots of different people to have these conversations, inspire each other, but then more importantly, create the right environment for the discussions, the development of solutions, and also then most importantly the adoption of what we're coming up with, whether it's a framework or a template or some reference data. And what we really want to do is take the time, build something that works for people across the industry. Everything we do is shared openly for no charge, and we want to create lasting solutions that really make our industry much more efficient going forward. And if I can have the next slide. So as I was just mentioning, you can see over time how Energy Leap, and all of this, as Peter said, is on our website, has really moved from looking very much predominantly US focused, because that's where Energy Leap was originally established, looking at contracts in the US and coming up with certain clauses or terms or conditions that have streamlined the industry there. But really then in the last few years, we've been looking particularly at the European barge market. We've been looking at letters of indemnity and KYC around hybrid delivery terms.
So, Catherine, your line just broke up for a few seconds. Perhaps you could just repeat those last 2 sentences. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I apologise. I'm dialing in from West Wales, so the Wi-Fi is possibly a bit intermittent. So apologies. I was just saying, in the last couple of years, we've really focused much more on this pre-digital space. So as you can see from the slide here with the wording in green, particularly focused on the barge space in Europe, looking at LOI wordings, KYC, and most recently on hybrid delivery terms. And the next slide will just talk to this in a little bit more detail. Oh, yes, that's the one. Cool, thank you. So in the last year or so, and again, all the details are on the website. We've worked as an Energy Leap team on LOI wordings. So there's now an Energy Leap standard LOI wording which can be used in the event that your own company's LOI wording can't get agreement. There's a US law version. The final versions were just published in January, and now we're working across all of the member companies around the way that we work as Energy Leap is that each initiative is well discussed between all of the members. We bring together a working group to really thrash out what the problem is that we're trying to solve, and each initiative is then sponsored and really led and managed by one of the board members. So in this case, the LOI wording was sponsored and led by TOTSA, and this LOI wording was something that they felt particularly very strongly about, but it resonated with all of the other companies as well. Another initiative, this one sponsored and led by Shell, is around the KYC space, and in fact KYC is something that touches all of our companies, no matter what area we might be involved in. And what we've been discussing as Energy Leap is there a way that we can standardise that initial request for documentation? It varies across the companies as to what gets asked for in the first instance, and this is really just to standardise that initial request. It doesn't stop people asking for additional documents depending on their risk appetites, the geographies they're working in, but just to get that initial first step just much more streamlined and straightforward. And then I'm not going to cover demurrage because that's what we're here to talk about today. The last thing I just wanted to mention was the hybrid delivery terms, which is something that we've been talking about just recently this year, is really trying to get some standard definitions around these hybrid terms, which I think in every company and even within different parts of companies have different meanings and can be quite variable. So the working group at the moment is really defining that problem statement, and that's something we want to be publishing on our website and on LinkedIn to try and get more comments as to whether this is something that resonates across a wider part of the industry. So at the moment, both TOTSA and BP see a lot of value in this, and yes, certainly over the coming months, this is something we'd like to share more widely and see if we can get more people to join this working group. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm really happy to answer any additional questions that may come at the end. But yeah, really what I want to do is hand over to Eric and the team now to talk about their demurrage work and just to thank them again for the tremendous amounts of work that have gone into getting us to this point. So over to you, Eric. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, for the introduction. So one of the other initiatives by Energy Leap was the ARA Barge Demurrage standard. So this is about the standard sharing information for the Antwerp, Amsterdam, Rotterdam area, particularly the barge market. And I think it's good to focus on something. And we also have an initiative on the demurrage for the seagoing part, but in this case, we only talk about the barges. That we saw as more standard and easy to achieve rather than the seagoing part, which is more difficult. This whole initiative is sponsored from the Energy Leap by BP, by Catherine. So she was a good sponsor to get this going. The objective of this is to define certain elements, certain data fields we want to share, and obviously for the purpose to make the whole exchange of data much easier. Currently, and later on the barge demurrage specialist will elaborate on that one, it is much a manual way of working, manual sheets to compare with different formats, etc. And this standard has the objective to standardize the format, standardize the technology to make the whole data sharing more easy. And if we go on to the next slide, I'm really proud to say it is a good co-creation, a collaboration of many people working on this initiative. It is about the development in the standard. We have the demurrage specialists in there with Evelyn and Elizabeth of TOTS MVP. Phil Stolley will tell us a bit more about how the actual standard looks like. Then we have the perspective from the barge owner represented by Tom Mall. And then Ewan McGregor will collect all the benefits toward how is the whole supply chain benefiting from the standard. So on the next slide, I want to share that it's really about the co-creation. That's what I'm proud of also as a team. It's not one party, one company, one person inventing this. No, it is really the co-creation of working together. I think it very much underlines the objective of Energy Leap of not competing on these parts, but co-creating and working together. And it was so nice during the whole project to see that there is so much mutual understanding of the issues in this whole market that it was easy to get these people together working on the whole standard. And then let me go back to the next slide, Peter, to see a bit about the timeline where we started. In the beginning, 2018, 2020, we were drafting the whole project with the objectives to focus on the barge part, not so much on the seagoing part. We had many discussions, also some discussions together with Thomas Kokish of VP aligning to the PIDEX. And then we drafted the first version, which we published on the Energy Leap website in December. And we call that the draft version 0.9. We received some feedback from the market, and we thought it would be very good to have a webinar. And I'm so pleased that so many people joined this webinar. So we are very aware of what this standard is about, but we also would like to ask you active feedback about these standards. So ultimately, we can come to a final version 1.0, which we will publish in July. And that is kind of the functional description of all the data fields that needs to be exchanged in order to make the whole demurrage process look easier. So it is quite some time we spent together working on it, but I think it is what it is. It takes some time to go through all together and to understand what one party is delivering from data and the other party receiving the data, what they do with it. So I'm really happy where we are right now with the webinar, and I look forward to finish the next version in July. So let me really go to the specialists and invite Elizabeth and Evelyn to go through the benefits from the demurrage specialist.
Thank you, Eric. Hello, everybody. So all of us who are involved in calculating lay time or demurrage knows how important a very good timesheet is, a detailed and accurate timesheet. It not only can make a difference in the lay time and demurrage calculation, but if you think about it, it can only make a very positive impact on the whole negotiation process of the claims. When we designed this timesheet element of the barge barge receipt, we looked at all the major charter parties and GTs and Cs for barges, and we looked at all the references to the port events and the deductions in particular. We looked at the nomination clauses, the lay time clauses, and the demurrage clauses, and that's how we came up with this template. Above all this, we also thought about the future, so we included many details for this because we all know the industry keeps changing, so we kept that element in mind as well. So what are the benefits? At this point, I'm handing it over to my colleague Evelyn in TOTSA, and she will highlight all the key benefits for this template.
Thank you, Elizabeth. The first benefit is obvious that it will help doing easier and faster review of claims, as all the required documents will be available from the beginning. There will be also less or non-discrepancies to be found among documents from different parties, as all documents will be standardized following this standard that we have tried to set up. Data sent in digital versions will be easier and faster to process, with potential error coming from manual process. Also, these automatic data exchanges will speed up the process of recovery. Probably that the agreement could be reached faster as the claims will be handled more quickly. Furthermore, the same language and wording will be used for the same event, so we will all speak the same words. We won't have a commencement of discharge, starting of unloading, and so on. So it will be easier to understand. And these digital data are much more legible and more workable than handwritten documents. So yeah, these are some benefits that we have identified, but depending on your organization, or you surely will find additional benefits to them. And now I will hand it over to Phil. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Evelyn and Elizabeth. Well, look, I hope this isn't a surprise to you to see this slide. I hope you've all had a chance to download the spreadsheet that is version 0.9, as Eric alluded to. And just to give you a bit of background, we started replicating the elements of the barge receipt, which appeared on the timeline that Catherine put up earlier, 2015. But we built on that and added the components needed for a demurrage claim. So it's not just the events in the at the terminal itself. What we've recognised is that this data will come from various sources. So if you look at this is the master list we have there, you'll see the third column is where we feel the origin of this data will come from. So you can see terminal buyer, owner, and if you look at the spreadsheet that you can freely download, you'll see tabs where you can look at, well, what do we see the terminal doing? So you can see them in some sort of order. So we see this data coming in from a number of various sources. How will it hang together? Well, we've identified some of the fields we think that could be common to all, such as the barge name, ENI number, and buyer product number, but those sorts of things can be ironed out later. And what we have done is in this draft is just looked at the relationship between the barge owner, operator, and the charterer. Now, of course, if we want to extend this into the oil trading chain, we recognise there will be a whole host of other information required, which will feed the calculations for rebills in the oil trading business. But that's kind of the background to where we are. And I think the next speaker is Tom.
Yes, thank you, Phil. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ton Mol. I'm working as the manager of the HEQ department at Interstream Barging. So I'm a safety guy. And I'm also representing once in a while our branch, and I'm also in the chair of PZI, Platform Zero Incidents, and PZI got in contact with LEAP for this project after I shared a presentation in distraction in this digitalization. And so therefore they asked me what my concerns are and how that we can optimize the process in that. The issue demurrage that they had was not directly my major concern. In fact, in my normal daily business, I have nothing to do with demurrage. Sometimes I think that therefore I'm a lucky guy. But I saw the importance in that, and Eric presented me the standard list that they already made, but what Phil also showed. We made a dry run with a voyage of one of our barges, and we saw all the documents that were presented by the terminal, by the barge master, by the operator, by surveyors, etc. So we made a very good contribution, I think, to this list. And if you look at the list, then the field name, the origins, and the format are quite important for us, because well, it's gets really some uniformity in documentation and in naming, because if you see how often how different how many different names a transport document or a timesheet or whatever it has, it can really be very confusing. And yeah, most of the times, lots of information from the barge master is required at the moment that he arrives at the terminal or that he leaves a terminal. And yeah, then he has something else to do. The things that I do it from the perspective of the guy, of the girl in the wheelhouse. Yeah, and sometimes they really have to do really something else than scanning in documents and email documents to that. So I think that this can be a very good contribution, because when we have some uniformity, we also have the possibility to digitalize it more in a process. There are lots of software programs who can help us in that. There is a really one big player who in which we report at many terminals in Rotterdam, Antwerp, and Amsterdam, and Zealand. And it can give more clarity and focus in what is needed from the barge master, so he can control it, and well, yeah, less mistakes. So I think then when there are the demurrage claims, they can be easier handled of. So that was my contribution. The picture you see, that is the documents that they are coming from only one voyage, and this is a virtual barge. When we have some chemical barges, the number of documents is a fraction higher. So yeah, it's good that this process can help us in digitalizing everything. Thank you.
I'm going to move to the next slide. Ewan, I think this is for you.
Thanks. So I work as a barge operator, so I don't deal with the demurrage claims. I don't sort of control the barge myself, but I'm more on the sort of commercial side in terms of nominations and contracts, and I do that for BP. So we've heard from Ton and from Elizabeth and from Evelyn around the advantages to the crew and to when the claim's being processed, and when that gets into the whole supply chain, where you may have a simple transaction where it's simply the barge owner to a sort of a final charterer, but you may also have a claim that then goes on through several counterparties. If the information is in a standardized form with the standard names and the fields pre-populated without having to be requested, then, as has been already mentioned, you get a faster flow of information. You can process it more quickly. If there is an area where there needs to be a discussion, then the discussion can be had on that, rather than the delays where basically it's back and forth waiting for information or something's unclear. And that frees staff up from focusing on sort of the trivial aspects to the more sort of important aspects of the claim about what's happened, and giving a greater clarity of what's happened with regards to the sort of contractual terms of the claim. So a standardization of information allows for just better flows, and that the longer the chain is, the greater the benefit, because basically the information, if you have it at the first person, should be adequate for the later people, because as Elizabeth said at the beginning, this standard has taken into account the requirements of various commercial terms for demurrage claims. It gives the additional benefit, of course, that once you have standardized data in a format that can perhaps be sort of readily processed, it allows for greater automation, and it also allows for greater interrogation of that data. So if you have the information coming in on a barge about its specific delays, you can also aggregate that to look at the sort of the wider effects more easily, rather than, as Ton showed on his slide, with the enormous number of sheets of paper. That's not in a format that is easy to interpret. It can be probably going to have to be manually entered into systems at various stages, and that introduces scope for error, but also means that you have information that is useful to everyone in the supply chain, which is it's difficult to process. So it's you see benefits on the barge, you see benefits on the demurrage claim, you see a better picture of sort of what information is going on, and so claims get processed or have the capacity to be processed more quickly, and the focus is on the sort of the important parts of the claim rather than the sort of the clarification of details.
Okay, thank you very much, Ewan. And can I just say thank you to Eric and the whole team for coming along and telling the story themselves. And I know one of the reasons they all came along today is they wanted to have a chance to engage with others in the industry. So that's why they're here. And I know you may have some questions directed in their direction at the end of this. I'm just going to spend a quick moment to sum up what you've heard and just to check that everybody's clear on what the story is. So the story, I mean, and I think pictorially, Tom made it so visible when he showed all those pieces of paper. I mean, and that's just from the barge owner. And I would imagine that most of the participants in this end-to-end demurrage world are seeing exactly the same problem. So we all know there's a problem. We all know it can get better. The question is, how do we get there? Now, obviously, we would like to press a magic button called digitization and suddenly it's all solved. Unfortunately, we have to do the pre-work to get there. Catherine talked at the beginning about pre-digitization, and this is where the energy leap part of the story comes in. It's getting that core definition agreed at the outset. And so that's what you're starting to see now, the definition. What are we going to do with that definition? Well, we want to deploy it, but how do we deploy it? Well, we'll have to have solutions. We're not here today, and this goes back to our antitrust, to advocate any one particular solution. I know that there are more than one vendor on the call today, and we very much welcome Phil for giving feedback, but Energy Leap does not favour any one vendor, nor is it advocating any particular technical solution, nor are arguing any particular architecture. But what it is doing is saying, before we go with great haste off and energy to do that next step, let's just get the basic definitions agreed. And that's what this standard represents. So in our Q&A session today, what we're going to invite is you to consider these two questions. What is the state of those definitions? You've seen it. Phil actually had the slide up, and of course, as Phil said, we all hope that you've downloaded and studied with great interest what that standard is. If you haven't, you know where you can go. And so it is possible that we may still have missed something. And if we've missed something, we'll add it. So this is about consultation. This is about enriching the standard to make it as best for all. And then also, but what do we do with it? It isn't just a beautiful standard, it's a practical standard. So how do we take that and start using it for the world of solutions and implementations? So that is a journey. That second question is about the next step of the journey, and we know it's ahead of us. So we haven't got all the answers, but we know that by working with members of the industry, we can start that journey as well. So without further ado, we're now going to move into the Q&A session. We're running this on MS Teams, so I'm afraid I haven't got any fancy webinar facilities. What I'm going to suggest is that somebody comes off mute and I'll acknowledge them, and then they can say their name, I'll acknowledge them, and then they can ask their question. So I'll throw the floor open now. Who would like to take today's first question? Well, there's two explanations to no questions. One is it's also good and clear that nobody has any questions left to answer. Or secondly, nobody likes to be first. I can't believe that
I'm happy to go first, Peter, just to get us rolling on the questions. Is there and apologies if this shows a lack of my understanding of the nuances. How applicable is this to barges in ARA and the Rhine? Would this standard apply equally to both?
Thank you, Catherine. I'm going to invite Eric to guide me to the right member of his team to pick up individual questions.
Yeah, this is very good because I'm the least experienced guy in this whole demurrage part, but maybe let me hand over to Elizabeth or Evelyn.
I'm happy to answer this question. So as I mentioned earlier, when we were designing the timesheet element of the barge receipt, we were looking at all the major charter parties and GTs and Cs and how they're referencing the port events. For example, what do they need to make an accurate lay time calculation? What they need, for example, to make the necessary deductions. What are the clauses? So I'm confidently saying that they are applicable. And we also considered the vessel element of things because we know that the industry keeps changing, and it's possible that as we evolve, as the industry is evolving, we want to get the demurrage and lay time calculations as accurate as we can. So we just made sure that we include a lot of events, as many as possible. I know some people might say that, but Elizabeth, we don't really use those. Maybe not at the moment, but also think about all those documents that were shown as well. Do we really need all of those documents? And we can standardize them. Once we have one standard document, we can always update the GTs and Cs. We can always update the charter parties to adjust. So it's just the very first step.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And I'm sure that's given others a chance to think of what questions they might like to ask. Who would like to?
Alex,
I think I've got Demetrius asking a question. Demetrius, can I invite you to bring your question?
Yeah, hello. Yeah, can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, hi everyone. So I'm Dimitris. I'm the demurrage manager for the Mercuria Group. So it's less than a year since the demurrage department of Mercuria has transitioned in Athens. So I understand that some people of you might not know me, or my colleague Stavros, who also joined and handles the ARA barges and shares the same concerns with all of you fine people. So I'm not sure if my question is a bit jumping some steps ahead, and maybe we are in an infant state of the standard that we want to produce. But I believe that the majority of the disputes in the barges is not stemming from it's the root cause is not discrepancies in the documents per se, but sometimes on the interpretation of the TTP rules that apply in the contracts between the supplier and the receiver of a cargo in a chain, in an FOB chain, and what's incorporated in the contract and the BP GTCs that sometimes go over and what terms supersede what, and if it is 3 working days or if it is not, if it is an MOC deal, not stuff. So I don't know if this is something as a later stage of the standard that we want to create as, let's say, a mutual understanding of how a uniform treatment of the claims without having to go over the same, counters, and coupled with VACT, which would be like, a very useful tool of the nomination process, then we can get to our to the result that we want to. But so my question is in 2 words: are we going to also find a way to interpret the contract terms in the same way?
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Demetrius, and your question's very clear and very relevant. I will just make a comment myself, and then I'll pass on over to Eric for his thoughts. The comment I'll make is that within the demurrage working group, we did split the team into one group looking at the data standard, which is what you've heard about today. And that's been focused on the ARA barge. We've had another group which we tended to talk about as the seagoing group, but in reality they were all looking perhaps slightly less at the data items, more at the contractual framework. So exactly the kind of questions that you've been asking. And that group is working in the background alongside. They're not at this point ready to publish, but they are very much looking at the questions that you've been asking. And indeed, you know, it's great if everybody has a standard GTCs, but you know, in some cases that there are industry participants who have slightly different interpretations of some of these. So therein lies a source of aggravation for demurrage process. And so yes, you can have the right data, but the right data against the wrong contract, and so you're not making progress. But so I think it's a very fair point. But Eric, let me also invite you to any comments you'd like to make on that.
Thank you for this question, Dimitris. As you already said, it's kind of a step forward. First, we have to agree about all those data fields, the definitions, etc., in order to share the data. Then we need a kind of technical platform for the sharing of the data. And then it's the next level of how to deal with the data. There's certain companies who have software themselves for calculating all the demurrage. I know there's also some companies out there that have this software available to do it on behalf of those customers. So there's different ways to get this forward. But first is to agree, how do you deal something like the actual time of arrival or the actual time of departure, start pumping, stop pumping, those data elements, have a unified definition of them, also from the barge perspective, the terminal perspective, the buyer and the seller, bring them all together. And then the next level is how to interpret it related to the contracts. But that's kind of the next level, the next step. Yeah.
So Dimitris, I hope we've sort of at least acknowledged your question and told you what we can give in terms of an answer. I mean, the only final point I'd make is if that's a group that is still looking at this question, you know, we would be delighted to connect you directly with that group. That's also an opportunity. So, you know, let's hold that thought and we can make contact afterwards, should you wish.
Yes, and thank you both for your responses. And I figured that this is maybe a step forward, and but we were just kindly, like 2 weeks ago, invited by Evelyn on this, so we weren't privy of the work as we've done before. So thank you for bringing us up to speed. And as I said, this is for me a major concern. So we'll touch base later in time as to what we can do on that. Yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Right,
sorry, this is Elizabeth from BP. I think you raised a very, very good question, and I'd just like to add that a few years ago, actually, as a LEAP working group, we were working at this very idea, and we published a set of GTs and Cs that, again, when we worked with different people involved from the whole industry, we were brought together to add our expertise. We again looked at all the GTs and Cs that were available at that time, and we tried to standardize terms and conditions for the whole barge process. So it's still available, it's still out there. I think it was published in 2014. Phil, would you be able to correct me if I'm wrong, or anybody else?
Yeah, so Elizabeth, it's Peter, and what you said is absolutely correct, and that's the sort of bedrock upon which, you know, some of these more recent discussions have happened. But you know, perhaps just to repeat, there is another working group that's looking at bringing those up to date in the specifics of demurrage, which you know, and obviously we can welcome your brain power on that one as well. But yeah, it's great that you've reminded us that this is an area where Energy Leap has successful standards before. So Elizabeth, thank you very much for coming in on that one. If I might, I'm going to now turn to another question. And I see somebody called Chris Dobbs, or Dabs, I apologise. Chris Dabs has raised his hand. Chris, can I invite you to come in, please?
That's all right. I've been called a lot worse, so thank you very much. I'm Chris Dabbs from BP. I've worked alongside you and as a barge operator for a long time. I'm also representing BP on another initiative on the VACT platform to standardise barge nominations, and I know VACT are heavily involved in trying to get terminals on board and also onboarding other trading houses, oil companies and the like. So I just wondered what interaction, if any, you guys had with VACT in terms of maybe collaborating the demurrage solution alongside the barge nomination solution.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much, Chris. And I do notice we have Sasha on the call today from VACT as well, which is great. Yeah, I mean, Energy Leap, I mean, as I think I said to you earlier, that there is this, if you like, partnership or complementary activity between the standard setting and the solution design. And we know that each is dependent upon the other. And yet, at the same time, you can't always play in the same space at precisely the same time. So what we've kind of formed as a strategy with VACT and other vendors is, if we see an area where we feel the industry benefits from definitions, we will go to those places and we'll take priority from our board members about where they see the value. If we can do that in an area where we know solution providers such as VACT are planning to invest, then obviously we're very happy to share our work with them, to seek their feedback. That can either work directly between myself and Sasha, we haven't spoken for a little while, or it can indeed work through members of participating companies such as yourself, where it takes somebody in a company to kind of help us bridge the gap between the theoretical work and the practical work. So it's a great question, Chris. And you know, it's this, Catherine mentioned hybrid terms is another area where we believe that might be an area that some solution vendors will appreciate in fullness of time. So it's a finding a balance between getting ahead with the definitions and then working on the implementation with the vendors. And you know, that's a balance that needs cooperation to take it forward. Eric, you've raised your hand. I'll pass over to you.
Yeah, it's a really good answer, Peter, on this. It's not only about VACT, it's also about other solution providers. We have UAB online, we have the Nextport, we have the HubC. So there's many more solution providers, and that's why I'm happy that these are these people are in the call as well. So we're happy to connect to them and to share the standard so they can apply the standard. And that is really the objective, to get the market in movement to adopt this standard and implement the standard in their software solutions, because then we get this happening in the market. Yeah.
And I think, and the final comment on that, and some of you may have heard me use this phrase, road testing. You know, a standard to me is a beautiful thing, but it needs to be real and practical. So we need to road test a standard. That's why we actively seek engagement with vendors to help us test standards. And so, and it's only when you test the standards, you tend to find out which are the bits that really matter and which bits work and which bits don't work. So yeah, it's a partnership that we strive to engage in all directions. But Chris, I don't know whether we've adequately answered your question, but anything else you'd like to add?
No, that's great. Thank you. It was just really for me to get some understanding of what interaction there's been so far, where it currently is, and maybe if there's anything needed to bring the two together in the future, then I'm quite happy to. Because I know Sasha well, so I'm quite happy to work alongside anybody to make that happen. So yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I really appreciate that, Chris. And I will make one final comment back to yourself, Chris, is if you know, there was a time when we had VACT and Leap trying to work on something together, and the individual in the company, let's say yourself as an example, found themselves kind of one moment pulled to a Leap meeting, next moment pulled to a vendor meeting. And, you know, if we weren't careful, we ended up stressing individuals trying to sort of do two versions of the same work at the same time. So yeah, it needs quite a bit of coordination to be successful, but that's we welcome your engagement as to how we can tackle that better in the future.
No trouble. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chris. Okay, I don't see anyone else raising their hands, but now's your opportunity to come in with a comment. So is there anybody else on the call who would like to ask a question of the team? So how many of you are going to, let me turn it into a question. Oh, I'm sorry, I do have a question. I have Daniela coming in. That must be from Pidex. Welcome, Daniela. Would you like to ask a question?
Hi, Peter. Well, thank you for presenting all of this and going through the standard and the timeline and everything so thoroughly through this presentation. And I just wanted to kind of ask, you alluded to how there were some conversations toward the beginning in 2018, if we can think that far back, with kind of the PIDEX data side of things. And so my question really is, at this stage, where might we see PIDEX fitting into this project, or is there any input that is needed from PIDEX?
Thank you very much, Daniela, and it's certainly great to have a voice of PIDEX in the mix. And I'm going to also hope that we have Thomas Cockish on the call. I believe he's on the call, and Thomas, as you're aware, Daniela has been the link from, in the case of BP, to PIDEX, and I know he has an opposite number in Shell that also links with yourself. And one of the things we've said to Thomas, and I'll give him a chance to give his thoughts in just a moment, but it's, you know, Thomas is such a great expert on what he has been working with the PIDEX standard that wherever possible, we've tried to bring some of that thinking into the work we've been doing. So it's absolutely an opportunity for us to do more together should the opportunity arise. But Thomas, maybe I can bring you in at this point. Would you like to offer any comments or thoughts on Daniela's question?
Yes, Peter, I can. Yeah, Thomas Cockish, also BP. I'm a solution architect, so I'm more from the IT side rather than from business. So I will not dig into the content now of what was discussed. I think the other team members can do that much better. The history of LEAP as I know it, and I was, as stated, more liaison between PIDEX and LEAP. At the very beginning, we were looking at or thinking about how to automate movements of molecules, let's say, and to exchange that. This then has over time changed. The team concentrated on the demurrage part. Now, what we did at PIDEX, I think starting 2005-ish, I don't know the exact year now, but I think it was around 2005, we started defining and also implementing an automated data exchange for movements, nominating, allowing loading operations, discharge operations, and collecting wherever possible real time the results of those operations. Now, I have to say we concentrated mainly on truck movements at the time because this was the biggest issue for us. For obvious reasons, it's the highest number of transactions, and therefore the benefit of automating those was the biggest. Secondly, we had quite a pressure at the time in Europe. Additional legal requirements came up like EMCS and so on and so forth. For electronic customs declarations, we had to exchange far more information than we actually used to in most of the countries. Now, as part of PIDEX, we have some experience in defining those standards related to those topics I just mentioned. We also came up with the technical guidelines and some technical standards like XSD, so style sheets, mandatory data, what is optional, validations, agreements, as well as implementation guidelines at the time. And got also some software houses on board who then implemented those things, and we are communicating. So I can say we have now, as part of our rollout, quite a few countries covered where we use PIDEX in our truck business and also partially barges, but not from the trading aspect, from a different aspect, so what we call supply business. And this is also one of my questions. If now the community agrees that the topic presented is of interest, that everybody can agree that what was presented and is available as documentation on the website is part of a standard and good enough and well understood, and everybody, so the question, one question for me would be, how do we define if that is good enough for a standard. So will there be a voting? Will there be some kind of committee to maintain those standards? And the second question then is, how do we get this to life? Basically, how do we implement that more on the technical side? And if we moved that way, then of course, from PIDEX point of view, would be very interested in cooperating with those, because we hopefully can find some synergies and don't need to reinvent the wheel.
That's yeah, no, thank you very much, Thomas. And I think that's been a very helpful sort of summary, if you like. And as we dream of going from standard to architecture to solution, and we can learn the lessons of others that have trodden that path before us. And whilst the world of truck movement sounds quite alien and foreign to the world of trading and deals, there's actually, when it comes down to data exchange, some very well-trodden paths and lessons learned. So I think we need to factor that into some of our next steps. There will inevitably be some dotting the I's and crossing the T's to do to take this standard on that journey. And we know that lies ahead of us. But at this point, it's almost like, what are those basic business definitions? Have we got those solid enough for us to take those steps forward? Daniela, I don't know whether we've fully answered your question, but any comment you'd like to make?
Oh, this is good and very helpful. Thank you to Thomas for that really great history on the standards. So, and thank you, Peter, for going through that kind of history as well. So I don't have any other questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Daniela, and great to have you in the call today. Okay, my clock says we are virtually out of time. So unless anybody is jumping in with a final question, I think I'm going to do a wrap up. So thank you again to all the people who've attended and listened to this call. Some of you may think of questions later. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us if you have further questions. We've got a contact form on our web. All of the members of the team are very keen to engage with you, and thank you all to them for taking their time to be with us today. Thank you also for Catherine for joining us from her holiday cottage today. So I think it's been a very useful session, and I'm going to give Eric a chance to quickly sum up any final thoughts he has as well.
No, thank you very much, Peter. Thank you very much for everybody joining this webinar. It is really valuable for us to spread this message across the industry and get it forward. As a pragmatic person, I always hate standards if nothing is done with the standards. I'd like to have the standards implemented in the actual IT systems and really bridging the companies working together on a digital way. As innovation manager, I'm always looking for optimization possibilities, and I see a lot of enthusiasm in the people joining this webinar. So I'm really excited to get some more questions, how we get this forward, how we get this implemented. And thank you very much, Peter, for hosting this webinar.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to close the call. So thank you all very much for attending today. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.